The wind hissed softly through the hedgerows of northern France, but beneath it roared something far more ominous, an unrelenting growl, like an army rising from the dark. In the pre-dawn mist of September 1944, Oberstleutnant Franz Weitzner of the German Wehrmacht raised his field binoculars and froze. The ridge below swarmed with silhouettes. Dozens of tanks stretched across the fields like black beetles, their forms hulking, still and deadly. Supply trucks weaved in and out like ants, while field lights blinked in coded sequence across the mist. He could hear it, two gears clanking, voices barking orders, entire regiments shifting into formation. Intelligence reports had warned of a buildup, but no one expected it to be this fast, this dense. Panic whispered beneath his breath as he radioed high command. American armor is massing near the river. Immediate reinforcement required. But what Franz didn't know, what no one in the German command knew, was that the tanks weren't real. The trucks were hollow. The voices came from loudspeakers hidden in the trees. And the army he was watching had been painted, pumped, and staged. Because that morning, what he was witnessing wasn't a military deployment. It was a deception, a performance. And it was working. Partithnan, September 1944. The Allied invasion of Nazi-occupied Europe had entered its third decisive month. The beaches of Normandy were no longer killing fields but supply depots. The great hedgerow battles of July had given way to rapid armored thrusts across northern France. The Germans were retreating, yes, but not shattered. Not yet. Berlin still controlled swaths of territory stretching from Brittany to the Dutch lowlands. And most critically, the Rhine River, Hitler's psychological and symbolic frontier, remained unbreached. Allied generals knew one thing: the war wasn't won until boots crossed that water. But there was a problem. As the Allies advanced eastward, their front line expanded from 100 kilometers to over 700. With just 9 divisions available to hold that line, the Americans faced a dilemma. Spread thin, they risked German counterattacks piercing through exposed flanks, concentrate forces, and they left entire regions vulnerable. The solution, as always in war, was deception. But this time, it wouldn't come from classified memos or sleight-of-hand diplomacy. It would come from theater, from paint, from sound, from illusion, the birth of a phantom army. 6 months earlier, in a quiet corner of Camp Forest, Tennessee, the U.S. Army had authorized the formation of a unit that sounded more like a film crew than a combat division. Its official name, 23rd Headquarters Special Troops. Its unofficial nickname, whispered in corridors of military intelligence, was the Ghost Army. Its mission was both absurd and audacious: to impersonate entire divisions of the U.S. military using nothing but inflatable tanks, fake radio transmissions, sound effects, and visual trickery. Its ranks included more than 1,100 men, not frontline infantry, but illustrators, art students, set designers, sound engineers, actors, and radio technicians. Some had painted murals in Manhattan apartments. Others had built parade floats or Broadway backdrops. A few had studied camouflage techniques at Ivy League universities. They weren't soldiers in the traditional sense, but they were going to help win the war. Why deception mattered in 1944. In the age before satellites and drones, battlefield decisions often hinged on 2 things: aerial reconnaissance photographs, intercepted radio chatter. If you could fool an enemy's eyes and ears, you could redirect entire corps without firing a single bullet. The Germans, masters of military deception in the early years of the war, had deployed dummy airfields, inflatable aircraft, and wooden tanks to confuse Allied bombers. They understood the value of camouflage and theater. But now the Americans were about to turn that weapon back against them on a scale the world had never seen. And it wasn't theory. It had already been tested. Operation Bodyguard. A lesson in misdirection. Earlier that same year, in June 1944, the success of the D-Day landings in Normandy was due in no small part to Operation Bodyguard, a vast web of Allied deception designed to convince the Germans that the main invasion would land elsewhere at Calais. That operation had used dummy landing craft, fake radio traffic, and even a double-agent network to mislead Hitler's high command. It worked so well that for 7 weeks after D-Day, German reinforcements remained tied up at Calais, waiting for a second, phantom invasion that never came. The Allies had seen how well lies could work. Now they wanted to operationalize that deception on the tactical battlefield, using mobile, flexible units that could be inserted near the front lines and simulate military strength wherever it was most needed. The genius behind the madness. The Ghost Army was the brainchild of Colonel Billy Harris and Major Ralph Ingersoll. Both were intelligence officers with a taste for the unorthodox. Ingersoll had once edited a left-leaning New York newspaper. He believed the war could be won not just with force, but with psychological shock moments that would make the enemy question what was real and what was staged. He wanted an army that didn't just shoot bullets, he wanted one that manufactured belief. To make this vision real, Harris and Ingersoll recruited from unlikely sources: the Philadelphia School of Industrial Art, the Rhode Island School of Design, advertising agencies in Chicago and New York, Hollywood sound departments. They needed men who could sculpt and paint, who could build something from nothing. They also needed engineers who could wire entire soundscapes to play back live battlefield noise. And they needed radio specialists who could mimic the syntax and slang of every division they impersonated. 4. Pillars of illusion. The Ghost Army operated on 4 parallel deception systems, working in concert to fool the German. Visual deception. Inflatable tanks, jeeps, and artillery. Painted scenery mimicking real bases. Simulated tire tracks. Fake campfires. Laundry lines with fake uniforms. Soldiers wearing insignias of units that didn't exist in the area. Sonic deception. Trucks carrying giant 500-pound speakers, pre-recorded sounds of tank movements, construction, radio orders, marching troops, carefully mixed to match the local terrain and echo patterns, played at night to simulate units arriving or assembling. Radio deception, spoofing. Operators transmitted fake messages using call signs and code patterns from real divisions, mimicked accents, slang, and personality quirks of known commanders. Trickled believable but false intelligence to bait German interception. Atmospheric deception. Soldiers casually interacting with locals in bars or cafes, leaking unit names. Fake MPs redirecting traffic and saluting fake generals. Use of fake military police to reinforce the illusion on the ground. Training for the theater of war. To prepare for deployment, the 23rd trained in secret locations across the U.S. They practiced setting up and inflating tanks within minutes, blending fake equipment into the landscape, deploying sound systems that could be packed and moved overnight, coordinating visual and sonic elements to match believable patterns. They learned how to disappear quickly if spotted. They rehearsed every illusion like actors before opening night. Because if even one German patrol stumbled across the trick too early, the entire operation and every man's life was at risk. Deployment begins in the late summer of 1944. As the Allies crossed France, the Ghost Army was deployed to field operations for the first time. Their role, to simulate a full armored division along the Moselle River, holding a vulnerable sector while real divisions moved toward Luxembourg. It was a test. If the Germans took the bait, the real Allied thrust would be unopposed. If not, the illusion would be exposed, and disaster would follow. So, under cover of night, the artists and tricksters rolled in. They inflated their tanks. They lit their campfires. They broadcast the thunder of imaginary armor across empty hills. They painted shadows on tarps to mimic real structures from the air. And when German reconnaissance photographed the site at dawn, everything looked correct. They believed. The stakes behind the silence. The Ghost Army operated under an oath of silence. Not even other American units were told the full truth. When infantry divisions marched nearby and saluted what appeared to be a tank battalion, they didn't know they were tipping their helmets to balloons and art students. In their journals, some Ghost Army members wrote about the psychological strain. We looked like soldiers, talked like soldiers, but we weren't allowed to shoot. If the enemy found us, we were just sitting ducks with paintbrushes. But still they continued. Each mission gave the Allies a strategic edge. Each illusion bought time, saved lives, and confuse the Wehrmacht's response. And all of it, every tire track, every radio ping, every false shadow on canvas, was part of a war nobody ever saw. A war of ghosts. Part 3. It began in a village with no name. Tucked between the folds of the Moselle River Valley in eastern France, the farmland was damp, sunless, and unremarkable, exactly the kind of place the Ghost Army preferred. In September 1944, Operation Bettenberg commenced. The mission: to convince the Germans that an entire armored division was holding the flank, when in reality there was nothing but canvas, compressed air, and recorded sound. Operation Bettenberg, the first full performance. The 23rd Headquarters Special Troops arrived under the cover of darkness. They didn't march. They didn't carry weapons. They came in trucks loaded with balloons and generators. Within hours, they transformed empty pastures into the illusion of a military buildup. 22 inflatable Sherman tanks were deployed in tight formation, carefully spaced to mimic real tactics. Dozens of rubber jeeps and artillery units were set beside roads, dirt smeared onto their surfaces to appear used. Tracks were carved into the soil using wooden rollers, giving the illusion of heavy movement. Campfires were lit, and mannequins dressed in U.S. uniforms sat motionless beside them. Laundry lines were strung with fake uniforms to suggest long-term presence. Sound trucks were positioned in the woods, playing loops of clanking metal, shouted commands, and idle engine rumble. Fake military police directed traffic at crossroads, adding to the atmosphere of authenticity. Most remarkably, radio operators spoofed signals identical to those of the real 6th Armored Division, using the same slang, call signs, and erratic chatter. From a German aerial reconnaissance plane, the illusion was complete. There was no reason to doubt what they saw. According to their analysis, 2 regiments of tanks had arrived. Panzer reinforcements were ordered to the area. Real divisions were pulled from the Siegfried Line to respond to a phantom threat. It worked, and it wouldn't be the last time. Operation Vianden, the Phantom Offensive. In November 1944, as weather bogged down the Allied advance and German counterattack stiffened, the Ghost Army was called to the Ardennes. The goal: simulate a large-scale American buildup in the Luxembourg border village of Vianden, pulling attention away from upcoming moves along the Ruhr. This time, the performance reached theatrical brilliance. Sonic deception engineers set up 8 truck-mounted speaker systems around the forest, programmed to play a full 8-hour sequence of battlefield sounds from vehicle convoys and bulldozers to shouted orders and generators. The loop even included the clinking of utensils, soldiers grumbling, and background banter. Scenic designers built fake headquarters out of tent cloth and wooden boards, painted to resemble sandbag structures. Props teams constructed dummy field kitchens, fake fuel depots, and even latrines with footprints leading in and out. Night patrols played casual roles, drunken soldiers stumbling through villages and leaking false unit names to locals, who were known to repeat gossip to Axis collaborators. By day 3, German reconnaissance planes flying overhead reported significant enemy movement and staging. Artillery units were repositioned to Vianden to prepare for an assault, which never came. The Ghost Army packed up silently the next night. What they left behind was confusion and silence. Operation Koblenz, the largest deception. But it was in March 1945, during the final Allied push into Germany, that the Ghost Army delivered its most daring and consequential deception, Operation Koblenz. The Rhine River stood as Hitler's last psychological barrier. If Allied troops crossed, Berlin would be next. General Patton's real Third Army was preparing to force a crossing south of Koblenz. But to ensure surprise, the Ghost Army was ordered to simulate the crossing further north, near Bad Neuenahr. Here's what they pulled off. Over 600 inflatable vehicles, including full companies of Shermans, half-tracks, and howitzers, were staged along the riverbanks. Bridge layer sound recordings were played over loudspeakers, steel clanking, chains tightening, wooden ramps slamming down. Smoke machines were deployed to simulate engineering activity across the river. Fake engineers in uniform paced out sites for pontoon placement during daylight hours. Every movement matched the rhythm of a real assault force. Radio traffic exploded with activity. German interceptors believed the 89th Armored Division was preparing to cross at Neunar. Panzer units rushed north to block the crossing. But Patton crossed elsewhere, unopposed. Operation Koblenz was a triumph not of firepower but of misdirection. The toll of lying. For the men of the 23rd, the thrill of success often gave way to a different feeling: paranoia. Unlike regular infantry, they carried no heavy weapons. If the deception was exposed, if a German patrol simply walked into their balloon-filled camp, there would be no firefight, just massacre. There were nights when we laid in our sleeping bags, listening to German artillery calibrating off our position, one member recalled. They thought we were a tank division. We were artists in the woods. Others spoke of the surreal psychology of the work: playing soldier but never firing a shot, performing danger without committing violence, living in character so deeply that they forgot who they really were. Still, they endured. And they succeeded. The Ghost Army would go on to conduct more than 20 full-scale battlefield deceptions across France, Luxembourg, Belgium, and Germany. Each time, German units reacted. Each time, real Allied divisions gained a tactical advantage. The ultimate deception: silence itself. One of their final performances came just before the collapse of Nazi Germany. In April 1945, Allied forces had encircled the industrial heartland of Germany, the Ruhr Pocket. Nearly 400,000 German soldiers were trapped, but pockets of resistance remained. The Ghost Army was deployed one last time to simulate a massive American flank maneuver, forcing one of the last Wehrmacht garrisons to surrender without a fight. Not a shot was fired. Not a single casualty was taken. Just 1,100 men with sound rigs, rubber tanks, and a flawless performance. And then oblivion. When the war ended in May 1945, the Ghost Army did not parade through the Champs-Élysées. They were not thanked. They were not even acknowledged. Every detail of their mission was classified under strict military secrecy for 40 years. Even their families didn't know what they'd done. Their legacy was reduced to footnotes, their victories hidden beneath layers of bureaucratic silence. Only in the 1,990 seconds did the truth finally emerge, when documents were declassified and surviving members began to tell their stories. The army that never existed finally became real. Part 4. The battlefield is often imagined as a contest of steel, gunpowder, and bodies, but the truth is colder and more abstract. In every war, before the first bullet is fired, perception has already done its work. The Ghost Army wasn't just a military experiment. It was a mirror held up to the fragile architecture of human certainty in wartime. And what it revealed was chilling. Why it worked: the psychology of belief under fire. Every illusion crafted by the Ghost Army worked for one fundamental reason: people see what they expect to see, especially in fear. By 1944, German commanders were under siege strategically, emotionally, and cognitively. Allied progress had shattered the myth of Nazi invincibility. Cities were burning, supply lines cracking, the Luftwaffe grounded. Morale was crumbling beneath constant retreat. In that mental state, commanders became hyper-reactive. Every intercepted message, every blurry photo from a recon plane, every local whisper carried the weight of a possible catastrophe. The Ghost Army inserted itself into that uncertainty and let the Germans finish the illusion. From the top down, the Wehrmacht could not afford to dismiss a threat. Even a minor chance that an armored division was forming near the Moselle or preparing to cross the Rhine demanded an urgent reaction. This is the paradox of military deception. The more desperate your enemy becomes, the more vulnerable they are to lies that confirm their fears. The power of multi-sensory manipulation. The Ghost Army didn't rely on a single trick. Its brilliance came from synchronizing multiple channels of illusion: visuals, tanks, tents, tracks, sound, speakers blasting 8-hour loops, radio, encrypted traffic that mimicked real units, behavior, soldiers acting out casual roles in villages. Each element reinforced the others. A German officer seeing 25 tanks in a field was more likely to believe them real if he also heard tank convoys moving all night, and if he intercepted U.S. radio chatter from that same sector. This multi-layered approach created illusion stacking, a concept now studied in psychological warfare doctrine. The more sources that align, the less likely an observer is to question. The result? Not just confusion, but commitment. Entire German battalions maneuvered to defend against armies that didn't exist. The economics of war and deception. Let's break it down to cold numbers. A real armored division in World War II required to 15,000 personnel, hasta 200 tanks, fuel, food, medical support, logistics, dozens of air support missions per week, maintenance teams for every tread, engine, and gun. The Ghost Army impersonated that level of force using to 1,100 men, to 600 inflatables, 30 tons of equipment, 2 days of setup, zero ammunition. Yet the operational impact was often identical. This is the uncomfortable truth the Ghost Army exposed. In the right circumstances, belief costs more than reality. A lie, if believed, can drain more enemy resources than an actual attack. For the Allied High Command, the Ghost Army was a strategic bargain. Each deception meant fewer real soldiers dying elsewhere. Each misdirection bought time, forced German repositioning, and spread their already thin lines even thinner. It was, quite literally, the cheapest army in the history of modern warfare per effect. But what if they'd been caught? The brilliance of the deception cannot be divorced from its danger. Every man in the 23rd knew one thing. If a single German patrol breached the perimeter, the illusion would collapse and they would all die. They weren't combat infantry. They carried light weapons, if any. Their tanks were rubber. Their radios weren't for calling backup, they were part of the show. This meant every mission carried a constant thread of existential risk. And that risk wasn't theoretical. At least 3 times, local German sympathizers almost stumbled into camps. On one occasion, an Allied infantry unit mistook the Ghost Army for a real armored division and requested support, only to discover the tanks deflated. The margin of error was inches, and yet it never failed. Not once was the Ghost Army's deception compromised in the field. The legacy, from camouflage to cyber war. What the Ghost Army did with canvas and compressors in 1944, governments now do with pixels and bandwidth. Modern warfare is no longer about capturing territory, it's about controlling what people believe. Deepfakes, fake troop movement leaks, AI-generated voices impersonating commanders, spoofed satellite imagery. All of it traces back to the same core doctrine: control perception, create reaction. The Ghost Army's multi-channel tactics have been studied by NATO Psychological Operations Divisions, Russian hybrid warfare units, Israeli intelligence services, Chinese cyber warfare doctrine groups. Its legacy is not quaint. It is alive in every disinformation campaign, in every digital decoy, in every pixel of false footage. The ultimate irony: victory through art. There's one more layer to this story. A haunting irony that only emerges when we pull back far enough. The Ghost Army was composed largely of artists. Not killers, not tacticians, not warriors. Illustrators, sculptors, stage designers, sound mixers, painters. Some had never fired a weapon. They didn't destroy, they created illusions. They used empathy, not violence. And they saved lives by making the enemy see something that wasn't there. In a war that killed 60 million people, their battlefield was silence, shadow, and suggestion. And they won. Of lies so perfect, it was erased. For nearly 50 years, not a single official document acknowledged what these men had done. Their stories were buried under security clearance. Their medals never arrived. Their names were absent from the textbooks. The United States government worried that revealing the truth might expose current deception methods in use during the Cold War. So they said nothing. The Ghost Army wasn't just fake to the Germans. It was erased from its own country's history until the 1,990 seconds when aging veterans began speaking. Their stories were almost disbelieved. Some had to produce sketches, field photos, and letters to prove they hadn't invented it. Even now, there are still surviving Ghost Army operations that remain classified. Some illusions, we still don't know, happened. Morality of military illusion. Was it ethical? That's a harder question. Some military philosophers argue that deception, even in wartime, can cross ethical boundaries, especially when civilians are manipulated or when enemy soldiers are tricked into walking into traps. But the Ghost Army's mission was arguably the inverse. They tricked soldiers away from violence. They protected real troops by substituting presence with fiction. Their lies bought life. Still, the line between psychological warfare and manipulation remains thin. And as modern states weaponize information daily, the Ghost Army becomes less of a legend and more of a warning. Part 5. The war ended. Berlin fell. The world began to rebuild, and the Ghost Army disappeared. Not into gunfire or glory, not into books or statues, but into silence. Their missions were buried beneath red-stamped files, their names absent from medals, their victories credited to units that didn't know they had been shielded by illusions. In a war obsessed with numbers, tanks, sorties, deaths, the Ghost Army's contribution was intangible. It couldn't be photographed or measured in kills. It existed only in what didn't happen. The German battalion that didn't reinforce the right bridge. The artillery unit that didn't fire where the real soldiers stood. The ambush that never took place because the enemy believed something else. That is the strange power of deception. Its success is always invisible. And yet, history is shaped by those invisible threads. A victory that felt like failure. When the war was over, many Ghost Army veterans returned home, feeling empty. They hadn't stormed beaches. They hadn't liberated cities. They hadn't fired a shot. "We tricked people. That was our war," one soldier said. "We fooled Germans. Then we were told to forget it." Some became teachers. Some became illustrators. A few tried to tell the story. But no one believed them. Because who would believe that a war could be won by rubber tanks and tape-recorded thunder? What their story says about us. The tale of the Ghost Army is more than a footnote in World War II. It is a revelation about the nature of belief, fear, and reality itself. It reminds us that, in the fog of war and in life, what we think we see often matters more than what is real. It asks us to question the footage we're shown, the voices we hear, the assumptions we carry into every crisis. It also challenges our idea of heroism. Are heroes defined by bravery under fire? Or can a man be heroic for never firing at all because he made sure others didn't have to? What we still don't know. Not all Ghost Army operations have been declassified. Rumors persist of deeper missions across other theaters, in other wars, even inside occupied zones. Could it be that some key turning points of the war weren't decided by generals, but by actors, sculptors, and sound technicians working in shadows? Could there be other victories we've misattributed because the ghosts never claimed them? History may never say, because illusion, by nature, erases its own fingerprints. As we look back from the comfort of the present, the story of the Ghost Army leaves us with a haunting question. If an army that doesn't exist can win battles, what else in history was never real but changed everything? Think carefully. Not everything that shaped the world left footprints. Some just left shadows.